Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I am your host, Attorney Henry Gorenbein. Today on Gracefully Graying, I am very pleased to welcome the former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, University of Michigan law professor, and MSNBC correspondent Barbara McQuade as she discusses her very important new book, Attack from Within. Barbara, welcome to Gracefully Graying.
Thanks very much, Henry. Very happy to be with you.
Well, thank you for being our guest. First of all, why don't you tell us about your background that might be relevant to your deciding to write this really wonderful and frightening book, to say the least?
Well, I spent most of my career as a national security prosecutor. Before I was U.S. Attorney, I was deputy chief of the National Security Unit at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And so I spent a lot of time learning about, thinking about, and experiencing national security threats to our country. And since I've been teaching at the University of Michigan Law School since 2017, I've been teaching a course on national security, and disinformation is something I've really focused on, this idea of information warfare. The internet makes this a new weapon that we are not always prepared for. And so it's been a topic of my interest, my research, my teaching for a number of years. And so I hope to share some of that perspective with people who want to learn more about it.
So what prompted you to finally write a book? I mean, writing a book is quite a big undertaking, to say the least.
Well, as a professor, it's really a wonderful thing because we have the space to do research and writing. When I was working as a prosecutor, you're running from one fire to the next, trying to just, keep up with the crush of business. But when you are in academia, in addition to teaching during the summers and other time, I have time for, more deep dives to read, to talk to people, to interview people, to research, to think, to write. And so over the past several years, that's really been the focus of my work. So I'd say since about 2018, this is an area I've been researching and decided to write about it. I wrote, shorter blog pieces, but finally decided to kind of put it all together in a book that could be accessible to ordinary people, to help people recognize and identify the tactics of disinformation so that we can all better be prepared to identify them and defeat them.
Barb, what is the main thesis of your book?
Well, the main thesis really is that truth matters, and that regardless of our political tribe, we really need to set aside our allegiance and our desire to win and understand the importance of truth in democracy. That's really the central thesis. But I think it's been under attack, Henry, in two main ways that make this problem so acute at this moment. One of them is social media. Never before have people had the ability to send a message that could reach millions of people in an instant, and to do so anonymously or under some false persona. So, that's one thing. Everybody has at their fingertips this incredible weapon. The other thing I think is that our society has really never been more polarized. Certainly we've had conflicts over our nation's history, over big issues, but the deliberate strategy of political parties to polarize us, I think, is at an all-time high. And part of that is because political operatives have data that shows that they are better off trying to double down on their base than they are trying to convince independents and the persuadable middle to vote for them. So since the 1990s, we've seen this shift in political strategy. There was a time, Henry, you probably remember, all my life it's been this way, where in primary elections, you see political candidates cultivate, if it's Republicans, the far right, if it's Democrats, the far left. And then in the primary, or in the general election, come together and try to attract those swing voters and those moderates and middle of the road voters, frankly, most of us. But what the data actually shows is it's a better bet in the general election to double down on your base, because if you can motivate your base to show up, that is reliable voters in either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, that those voters will be reliably in your column. Those independents, those swing voters, they might vote for you and they might vote for the other guy. So what we'd rather do is excite our base and let them believe that this is an existential crisis, that we've never seen anything like this before and you have to show up. And the middle of the road voters get exhausted and say, I can't stand either one of them. I don't want to vote at all. I'm either going to sit this one out, or I'm going to vote for some third party candidate who is not going to make a dent in the general election. And that leaves us with this political climate of great polarization where people care more about winning than they do about actual ideas.
Well, that's what's terrifying. It's like it's lost any sense of reality. It's all about winning. And what's sad is I personally received so many emails asking for money from both Republicans and Democrats and independents. And it's like I want to turn off all these streaming devices because it gets worse with every election. Now it's just become totally out of control. What are some of the tactics of disinformation that you can tell our viewers about, Barbara?
Yeah, so one of the tactics is this idea of declinism, that society is going downhill and that extreme times call for extreme measures. This was a tactic that goes back to, Adolf Hitler. After World War I, Germany was defeated, of course, and Hitler seized that moment of economic downturn, what he called the shame of the German people, and tried to utilize that to suggest that the country was in terrible shape and therefore extreme measures were necessary. That allows him to point to scapegoats, in his case, Jewish people, and to impose extreme measures, including suspending the Constitution. And so we see some of those same things today, right? We hear about how our country is in ruins, our cities are in shambles, American carnage. Everything is terrible in our country. In fact, if you look at objective measures of our country, we have our problems, to be sure, but our country is really in great shape compared to other times. Unemployment is down, gross domestic product is up, crime is down, infant mortality is down, the Dow Jones stock market is at an all-time high. And so despite all of these good things, we've learned how to fight diseases, we're living longer. You would think that our country is in ruins to hear politicians talk about it, because what they want to do is get us excited about these culture war issues. And so instead of focusing on solving real problems, immigration is a real problem, but instead we have people baiting us in fear mongering about how people are trying to replace us with others, with Black and brown people or Jewish people who are not like us, trying to appeal in the most cynical way possible to Christian nationalism. All of these things, whether the issue is guns, the LGBTQ community, affirmative action, DEI initiatives, whatever it is, trying to stoke division in society so that there are some scapegoats. And so, we can point to immigrants, we can point to the LGBTQ community as trying to, falsely groom your children for pedophilia. If we can paint the other side as demons and terrible and an existential threat to our democracy, then winning is what matters most. And if winning is what matters most, then any ends will justify, any means are justified because of those ends. And so that's when you hear things like, Donald Trump talking about being a dictator for a day, or going after his political rivals with criminal prosecution. I mean, these are things that violate the rule of law. But when people are convinced that their side matters over this other side that is trying to, attack their vision of America, then people can justify all sorts of bad behavior that is inconsistent with our democratic values.
It's terrifying. Watching the news or reading the paper, it seems like one of the two political parties is really trying to demonize. And I'll say it like it is. It's Trump's message is really everything about negativism, that America has fallen really horribly and you've got to make it great again. And it's so negative, and everything is about retribution, revenge, and it's terrifying.
Yeah, one of the things that bothers me most, I think, as a former prosecutor, is seeing not only Donald Trump, but other extreme members of his inner circle really amplifying these claims. And certainly, people can vote for whoever they want to vote for. Lots of people vote for Republicans because they care about some of the values of smaller government and conservatism and free markets and other kinds of things. And, in lots of down ballot races, perhaps that makes sense. Vote for Democrats if you share those values and you care about, some of the issues that they stand for. And, there are all kinds of candidates up and down the ballot who are fine choices for people to vote for. But when I look at Donald Trump and hear his rhetoric, he's really, in an effort to seize power, I believe, he is really willing to just burn down the institutions we have spent more than 200 years building up. And so criminal prosecution, for example, the rule of law, it has to be based on facts and laws to be able to charge someone with a crime. He doesn't like the fact that he was charged in this Manhattan District Attorney's case and convicted of a crime. Reasonable minds can disagree about whether Alvin Bragg appropriately exercised his discretion in that case, but it was absolutely a crime. Alvin Bragg didn't magically turn a misdemeanor into a felony. The law does that, just as lots of other laws have escalating levels of penalties depending on the more egregious use of it. In federal law, possession of a small quantity of illegal drugs is a misdemeanor. It gets converted into a felony depending on the quantity of and type of drugs that are used, which can lead to felonies with escalating levels of punishment up to life in prison. And so this idea that somehow Alvin Bragg magically waved a magic wand and turned a misdemeanor into a felony is just nonsense. Hunter Biden was just convicted for possessing a gun and lying on a form about his addiction to drugs. Again, reasonable minds can disagree about whether that's the best use of criminal resources to bring that case. But as a jury saw, he was guilty. They convicted him of the crime based on the facts and the law. That's how the law works. This idea that not just Donald Trump, but Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, and John Yoo, a former Department of Justice official, are really pushing this idea that prosecutors should be filing criminal charges against their political rivals. And part of that really is to delegitimize the system and the conviction of Donald Trump. John Yoo, again, this former DOJ official, he was most famous for writing the torture memo after 9/11, giving the CIA permission to engage in torture methods. What he has written is that it is necessary to charge criminally members of the Republican Party so that we can neutralize the criminal conviction of Donald Trump in history. I mean, think about that, using criminal prosecution just as a political tool. That is not how it's supposed to work. I am hopeful and confident that there are plenty of checks and balances in the system, like grand juries, like probable cause, like an independent judiciary, and like members of the public who become jurors, who can serve as a safeguard against politically motivated prosecutions. But even this drumbeat to talk about using prosecution as a political weapon, I think undermines public confidence in how the rule of law works and in the legitimacy of criminal prosecution. And where that leads long-term, Henry, is in people distrusting the legal system and perhaps being inclined to take the law into their own hands. Now, maybe not ordinary citizens like you and me, but certainly people like those who attacked the Capitol on January 6th, or the man who attacked an FBI office in Cincinnati after the search at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. People hear these things and take it as a call to action. It's incredibly dangerous and reckless, and it undermines our institutions that protect all of us.
Well, what's frightening is this morning, Speaker of the House Johnson is trying to demonize, saying that the Bidens are a criminal enterprise, and that on one hand, they're saying that Trump should not have been convicted in New York, but Biden should have been. And it's just the lies and the fact that people in so much power are spewing so much information. This is what gets to me. And, what can I say? It's terrifying. And it's like the bulk of the Republican Party, sadly, is just following Trump like lemmings.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the bulk of the Republican Party, but certainly those in many in leadership positions are doing that. You know, Mike Johnson, you mentioned, he said something so disturbing, which is, I'm sure the Supreme Court isn't going to let this stand. I know some of those justices, and I think they're going to be disturbed by this. That suggests that he's having sort of private side conversations about this case. I'd be surprised if that were actually true. But again, it undermines public confidence in prosecution. But there are things that we can do, Henry. We can talk to our friends and neighbors when they hear these things. One of the things that's so damaging when these people in positions of leadership say these things is that ordinary people who listen to it believe it to be true, and it has influence on them. I think if we can, we as lawyers have a responsibility, I think, to talk to people about how the system works, about the safeguards in the legal system, about how criminal prosecution, it is unethical to use criminal prosecution to go after one's political rivals. I also think the other thing that we ought to be talking about is this disinformation about the Biden crime family. That is a new key phrase that we are hearing members of Congress use. This is another tactic of disinformation that Hitler wrote about in Mein Kampf. Simple, repeatable phrases that you can say gets into the mind and the psyche of the public. It's a marketing trick, right? It's like got milk or just do it or where's the beef? All of these little phrases are used because they get into the public consciousness. And in the same way we heard lock her up and stop the steal, drain the swamp, and all of these catchy little phrases that Donald Trump has used throughout his campaigning, the new one seems to be the Biden crime family. Now, no doubt, Hunter Biden has been convicted in a court of law legitimately for lying on a form about his drug addiction in purchasing a gun. That's a crime. That doesn't make their family a crime family. He's also been charged with tax offenses, and he will face a trial in that case in September. Those are crimes. There's been no evidence that Joe Biden has been involved in crimes. There's been no evidence that any other member of his family has been involved in crimes. And so this language, this idea of the Biden crime family is just a perfect example of how this works with a germ of information and then amplifying it. There's also this whole swirling controversy about Hunter Biden's laptop and how it contains evidence that somehow Joe Biden was influencing corruption in Ukraine and influencing corruption in China. There is absolutely no evidence of that. But you've got just enough little nuggets of information that people can use without specific claims. And if you ask people, what's the evidence that there's a Biden crime family? They'll say, I don't really know, but you should watch Fox News because they talk about it all the time. But do they? They ask a lot of questions. They suggest that what's suspicious out there. But we know ever since Donald Trump was trying to shake down the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, right, saying, just announce that there's an investigation and leave the rest to me. Or as he said to the Department of Justice in 2020, just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me. He just needs that little germ of information, and then we'll spread disinformation. But I think we as lawyers need to push back about that and say, when you hear these conspiracy theories, what is the evidence and what is the source of that evidence? Because most of the time, people are unable to articulate.
I guess it gets back to the thing, and almost the question is, why do these tactics work on us? And part of it seems to be, Barb, is that catchphrases, stop the steal, make America great again, they're catchy. And it's like, maybe that's why these things work. People want simple answers, and we're in a society where there are a lot of complex problems, and simple answers aren't always the best answers. But tell us more about this from your book perspective.
Yeah, I did a lot of research into this, Henry, because I find it so fascinating. Why does this stuff work on us? Are we really that simplistic and that dumb? And the answer is actually no. We've got complicated minds, but we are subject to manipulation because of a lot of the way we're wired and a lot of the cognitive biases that we have built to make sense of a complex world and for self-preservation. And so these are actually, common things that you would expect social creatures like us to develop to help us navigate society. But when people know how we're wired, they're able to use those cognitive biases against us. So one of them is fear. When we're afraid of things, we naturally retreat, or we build up defenses, or we look for ways to go on the attack. And so that is something that disinformers harness fears against us. You're going to lose what's yours. There are elites who look down upon you. There are immigrants who are coming for your job. There are people who are coming for your way of life, and we have to defeat them. That's fear, and that preys upon one of our most innate instincts, which is to protect what we have, our children, our homes, our families. So that's one. Another is our propensity to believe in conspiracy theories. It is a complicated world, and the more complicated it is, the more we seek to make sense of it. And so rather than believing things are just random and stuff happens, we want to put some order around it to be able to control this complicated world. And so when someone offers us an explanation of these forces behind the scenes who are in collusion and controlling things, we tend to believe it. One of the things that causes us to believe in conspiracy theories, again, is just making sense of a complex world and trying to remember lessons that we've learned before. So we draw patterns. When we see gathering dark clouds, we reach the conclusion that maybe a storm is coming. I better get inside. I better bring things in before I get caught in this storm, because we've seen that before. It is some of those same patterns and biases, Henry, that causes us to have implicit biases and draw conclusions about people based on their appearance or the way they speak, because we rely on stereotypes about things that we have seen before. And we've learned that we need to check those implicit biases. We can't eliminate them, but we can manage them. And in the same way, when people try to explain our complicated world with conspiracy theories, we need to think about those things and question them before we rely on them. You know, one of these conspiracies is the Great Replacement theory. And that is this idea that a Jewish cabal owns and controls all of the banks and all of the media, and they're trying to control our thoughts to replace us meaning white, Christian, European origin Americans, and replace us with people who are Black and brown and Muslim and Jewish. And so we need to push back against those things. It's nonsense. It's absolute, utter nonsense. And so, you know, when we hear those things, I think we as lawyers, or, you know, we as people who know better, need to push back and ask people for the evidence and the sources of those things beyond just these sort of, you know, shadowy conspiracy theories.
It's amazing. Let's go to another topic, and that is technology. It's like, I'm old, and when I grew up, when television started, there were just 3 channels. It started with 1 or 2, and then now we have so many sources of information, and it seems now you want to turn into a certain idea, you get information from one source, you want another idea, you get another source. And so therefore we're becoming more and more isolated with more and more information. But tell us how technology is contributing to the problem of disinformation, Barb.
Yes, isn't it ironic that we have access to more information than ever before, and in some ways we couldn't be more foolish? I think it's interesting. You know, throughout history, every invention brings with it incredible new opportunities, and also opportunities for abuse or harm. You know, when the airplane was invented, I don't know, the Wright brothers, I guess, invented the airplane. They also inadvertently invented the plane crash. And so these things can be wonderful tools, but they can also be harmful and dangerous. And I think we have to understand how to use them wisely. You know, throughout history, every time there's been a new innovation in communication, people have abused it for their own purposes. So, you know, the printing press leads to false propaganda through leaflets. Radio allows, you know, Hitler to go on and give all kinds of false messages. Television becomes a new medium where people see images that are influential on them. And now the internet and social media provides opportunities that are really exponentially more powerful, I think, than any of these others I have just named. One of the assignments I give to my students in my national security class, Henry, is to read the Mueller report, and not the portions about what he did or did not find about Donald Trump's campaign in 2016, but the portions about Russian efforts to sow discord in society through social media accounts that were designed to appear to be the accounts of ordinary Americans. Russian operatives spread false information that was designed for the purpose of sowing discord in American society, to make us angry with each other, to make us fight with each other. Because their theory was, if we are angry at each other and fighting each other, we don't have the bandwidth or the mental capacity to worry about what Russia is doing. And it is Vladimir Putin's goal to reunite the former Soviet republics under the flag of Mother Russia. And so if we're too busy fighting each other, we're not going to be able to notice or pay attention to what's happening in Russia. And boy, has it worked. They created false accounts with all kinds of names like Blacktivist, to look like a Black political activist, United Muslims of America, pretending to be Muslim, Tennessee GOP, pretending to be grassroots political activists in Tennessee, Heart of Texas, pretending to be a good old boy from Texas. And then they say all of these outrageous things to make people think, look at how awful the other side is. Heart of Texas talked about Texas needs to secede from the Union because of all those woke Democrats who are ruining America. Blacktivist said we should not vote for Hillary Clinton because she's never done anything for our community. All of these people were just, some Russian 20-something in a hoodie in St. Petersburg, Russia. And in fact, people believe this stuff. They garnered hundreds of thousands of followers who started saying, yeah, look at that. Or other people saying, look at this awful person. And so we're fighting with Russians believing that they're our fellow Americans, but it causes us to harden our positions and to believe that our opponents have ridiculous, outrageous views when in fact they don't. And so it's technology is really allowing this, not just false information, but influence campaigns to cause us to be very antagonistic toward each other.
It's like, and I'm sure that this information campaign is going now. I know China's working on it, Russia's working on it, and who knows who else. We are running out of time for the first show. I would like to say, Barb, that there's so much more to cover. I'm asking that you continue if we take a short break for maybe a minute or so, and then start by discussing why some of America's virtues are some of our worst vulnerabilities as well. So, Barbara McQuade and the important book, Attack from Within. I want to thank you so much for being our guest on Gracefully Graying. I want to thank our viewers for watching Gracefully Graying and our sponsors as well. And we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back with more Gracefully Graying and Barbara McQuade. Thank you.